Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, December the 29th, 2025. I want to spend a bit of time looking at the horoscope of King Charles III of Britain, and there are a few things going on in his horoscope which I do need to talk about. They particularly relate to his primary directions. But before I talk about King Charles, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching of today, which is Monday, the last Monday in 2025. So here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time. And don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. Top right, that is, of course, King Charles. Just a reminder that that's who I want to talk about in this video. So as far as what's happening today, so looking at the chart set for midday New York time, the moon is at 3 degrees Taurus. So we have the moon moving into Taurus at 11:57 a.m. London time, and that means that if you're in Europe or Africa, certainly last half of the day you've got the moon in Taurus. First half of the day, the moon is in Aries. If you're in the Americas, then for most of the day the moon is going to be in Taurus. I mean, if you're on the East Coast, in New York, for example, the moon moves into Taurus at 6:57. Is that right? Yeah, 6:57 in the morning on Monday, so 7 o'clock in the morning. So it is going to be a moon in Taurus day, very much so if you are in the United States. So aside from that, well, the moon makes three aspects of note. Just before it moves into Taurus, it makes a trine to Mercury. So you've got moon in Aries, late Aries, trine Mercury. Then when it does move into Taurus, it makes a trine to Venus. So the day starts with moon trine Mercury, it ends with moon trine Venus, and then we've got a square aspect between the moon and Pluto. That's what happens once the moon moves into Taurus. Moon square Pluto, that might be a fairly intense, if rather brief aspect, but I think the moon trine Mercury, moon trine Venus is more important. I mean, moon trine Mercury, is an aspect which is quite flowing. We can say what's on our mind, and getting the words out shouldn't be a problem. And then moon in Taurus, trine Venus in Capricorn, that is a great aspect. It's an aspect that is relatively sociable. It's not an especially exciting aspect because it's a trine and it's in earth signs, but maybe we have a chance to bring things down to earth on a social level. And really that's it. I mean, there's not a huge amount happening today. If you're into midpoints, then the Sun is still on the Venus-Mars midpoint. The Sun is also conjunct the Venus-Cupido midpoint. So Venus-Cupido, if you're into hypothetical planets, well, let me just show you what I mean by the Sun being on the Venus-Cupido midpoint. Let me just show the hypothetical planets. So if we look at the hypothetical planets, there is Cupido at 9 degrees Capricorn, and so there is there's a Sun between Venus and Cupido, and it's also between Venus and Mars. So if you think about Venus and Mars, well, that is about attraction. Venus-Cupido, to an extent, is also about attraction. So, if we can get into those two midpoints, and remembering we've got Moon trine Venus, it socially and perhaps in terms of relationships, can be quite a good day. People want to get on with each other, and so maybe we can make the most of that energy while it lasts. So, if we turn our attention to to the picture for Australasia. Let me just switch over. Okay, so hold on. Okay, so it's turning to Sydney, Australia. So here is a chart set for noon in Sydney, and the moon is at 23 degrees Aries. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, then the moon does not move into Taurus today. It's a moon in Aries day, and that means that moon trine Mercury I was just talking about is quite possibly going to be the main event of the day, and it just could be a day when you can be yourself, when you really can say what's on your mind, and you don't have to worry perhaps about the entrenched approach of moon in Taurus. There's none of that. You don't have to worry about that until tomorrow. But moon in Taurus, I don't think there's much to worry about with moon in Taurus, because the moon is moon is exalted in Taurus, so that's not a problem. So if you are in Australasia, probably an easier day than if you're in the Americas. I mean, I'm not saying that the Americas is going to be much of a problem, not a problem at all, but I think it's just easygoing. Moon in Sagittarius, moon in Aries, trine Mercury in Sagittarius. Everything is running smoothly. A lot to say, a lot to talk about, and there shouldn't be much in the way of pressure. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So here it is. Mercury is heliocentric. Mercury, of course, is in late Scorpio, and Mercury is moving towards an opposition of Uranus. So Uranus is at 29 degrees 53 Taurus, so pretty soon Uranus is going to move into heliocentric Gemini, and Mercury is about to move into heliocentric Sagittarius. So Mercury opposition Uranus, well, it certainly emphasizes the communication aspect of the day, remembering that the moon is trine Mercury, and so there may be things that we want to say, but it is Mercury opposition Uranus. And, the way words come out, if one takes a sort of a heliocentric view, may not necessarily be especially easy. There may be a feeling of sort of hastiness about this Mercury-Uranus opposition. Additionally, note that the Earth is starting to make an opposition of Mars. Now, what that means is that, geocentrically, the Sun is starting to make a conjunction to Mars. I mean, the Sun and Mars are in conjunction. That aspect is not exact, but it is certainly getting there. And Earth opposition Mars, that reminds us quite starkly that perhaps trouble is brewing, that we can't agree with everything, we can't agree with everything we hear, and sometimes we just need to react. But it's not exact yet, so I don't think that we need to worry about that aspect immediately. So now I want to turn to the 12 signs. It's one of those days where I don't think there's a massive amount to say, so I will be trying to keep it brief. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, December the 29th, 2025. Aries, we are getting used to a big change. There has been this transition from a situation where there were a lot of planets in fire signs to what we have now. So we have now a real Earth emphasis. We already have the Sun, Venus, Mars in Capricorn. Now the Moon is moving into Taurus, and Mercury is going to move into Taurus soon enough. So we've got 4 personal planets in Earth signs, and that is going to have an impact on you, Aries. It's a time when you shouldn't just be thinking about your next action. How are you going to respond? How are you going to let everyone know what you think and what you feel. Instead, Aries, it just could be a time of consolidation, trying to understand what you have and perhaps what you don't have, and perhaps taking steps to bridge the gap. So it's not about taking on anything new at the moment. I think it's about taking what you have and making the very most of it. And, also perhaps you're starting to prepare for, the new year. 2026, when, the holiday season is over, and, certain material realities may just be difficult to avoid. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. For example, money, work, if you are working, how you are going to see things through to the next stage. Because it's not really just about taking the initiative. It's about deciding how exactly you go about things. And so, today, tomorrow, and in the lead up to January the 1st, there may be things you just want to sort out and just make sure that you are properly aligned. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be quiet and well behaved. If something needs to be said, I think you're going to be very good at saying it. That's especially the case if you're an Australasian Aries, or if you're in Australia or New Zealand. The moon is making a trine to Mercury today, and the moon doesn't move into Taurus until tomorrow if you are in Australia or New Zealand. So moon in Aries trine. Moon in Aries trine Mercury. Now that really does allow you to speak your mind. But then if you're in the Americas, the moon is not going to be in Aries really, except for very early in the morning, and the moon will be in Taurus, and it makes a trine to Venus, and that moon trine Venus means that your best interests might be served by being pleasant. You may not necessarily feel pleasant, but moon trine Venus, that's probably the way to go. Doing what you can to understand people, get on with people, and in the process you might be thinking about where your best interests lie. And it could be that short term at least your best interests are served by being warm and friendly and perhaps even accommodating. You might not want to be accommodating, but there's always a place for being reasonable. Okay, you can perhaps be more assertive at a later stage. And also, if you are reasonable, other people are going to trust you more, and they're going to be more open and free about expressing their thoughts and opinions, and that gives you a better idea about what actually is going on. So Aries, I'm not saying that it's going to be a spectacular day. I don't think you should be always seeking to take the initiative, and to an extent it may be about consolidating what you have, trying to understand what is happening. And that's especially the case from a career perspective. If you do have a career, if you are working, don't forget we've got the Sun, Venus, Mars in Capricorn, which is a very ambitious sign, at least from your perspective. It's about thinking about where you're trying to go, and Mercury is about to move into Capricorn pretty soon. So think about your priorities, and it's not necessary, I don't think, to feel that you always have to be the one taking the lead or taking the initiative. I don't think that's necessary today. And instead see what you can do to make sure that everything is maintained. And do think about the future, but just because you're thinking about the future doesn't mean that you have to respond. You can just get your ideas together and make sure that all your plans are in order. Taurus, the moon is moving into your sign, and that's especially important if you're in the Americas, because very early this morning the moon moves out of Aries and into Taurus. If you're in Europe or Africa, then first part of the day the moon is in Aries, but certainly from lunchtime onwards and probably earlier, the moon will be in Taurus. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, well, the moon is not going to be in Taurus until tomorrow. But by and large, moon in Taurus, moon moving into your sign, that is certainly a good thing. It does energize you. And it's not just because the moon is moving into Taurus. I mean, that is a good thing, of course, because the moon is exalted in Taurus. But the moon picks up on those Capricorn planets, because, we have got Venus, Sun, and Mars in Capricorn. And the first aspect the moon makes in Taurus is, well, the first aspect to a major planet. I mean, it does make a square to Pluto, but the first aspect it makes to a social planet is that moon trine Venus. So, moon trine Venus, is really pleasant. I mean, you've got the moon in your sign, exalted in your sign, making a trine to Venus, which is, of course, your ruler. So moon trine Venus means, Taurus, that you can really be a nice person. There is a place for being a nice person, at least on the surface. You can, I think, get on with people pretty well, and at the same time, you come over as being quite interesting. You're in a position where you've got a lot to say, and you have a particular view of the world, which it's very individual to you, but I think it's something worth discussing, and or at least expressing. Yes, if you've got a view of the world, you don't necessarily have to talk about it. You can just express it in the way you behave, and in terms of the way you are. And so this trine between moon and Venus is something to really make the most of, and don't be too sort of hung up on your own stance, on your own ideas. Being a Taurus, and of course Uranus has gone back into your sign. Yeah, being a Taurus at the moment, yeah, you can be stubborn. You have got things that you're holding on to, and that's all well and good. But do you want to really demonstrate that? I don't think it's a time for showing your stubbornness. I think that as far as possible, you should try to understand what other people have got to offer. Yeah, you have got things to offer, you've got ideas to offer, but so have other people. And it's probably not a time for just feeling that you have to assert yourself come what may. It's not about egos. So there is a bit of a choice here. Now, I understand also that you do have priorities. The moon is not just making a trine to Venus, it is also making a square to Pluto. And, this square to Pluto is an aspect that is certainly dynamic. And it does mean that you are thinking about what you need to do. You're not entirely relaxed. So, Taurus, the thing is that you've got to get the balance right. You've got to make sure that you're able to proceed with your ambitions. And, perhaps you recognize that it might be quite a dramatic process in the end, that things have to be transformed, that the old ways of doing things are no longer working. But at the same time, you have to deal with other people. And you don't want to make people feel nervous. You don't want to be too pushy. That is all unnecessary. And in fact, Taurus, what you might in the end recognize, that if you are trying to change everything, if you're trying to have a transformative impact, you actually need other people on your side. And so it's not a time to be alienating anyone. And that would be just so unnecessary. With that moon trine Venus, you have a real chance to bring people onto your side. And first of all, you listen, and then you accept, at least on the surface, you accept what's being said, and then you can start to move forward. And there is one other thing going on Taurus, is that you are quite sensible at the moment. It's helped by the fact we've got so many planets in Earth signs, because we've already got Venus, the Sun, and Mars in Capricorn. Now the Moon is moving into Taurus, so we've got 4 personal planets in Earth signs, and the Earth signs can be about just understanding the realities of a situation and understanding what is possible. And right now Taurians have a good sense of restriction, the kind of restrictions that are placed upon you, and not just you, but placed upon you and everyone else, that are placed upon you by, for example, governments, laws, bylaws, regulations. You understand all that. And that means that if you are in a position of authority, or if you're a bureaucrat, or if you're someone who deals with laws all the time, I think you're going to be very effective, and you're going to be able to explain what can be done and what can't be done, and how the regulations work. I think you're going to be able to do that very well. So that might mean that if you are in a position where you have to understand how the laws work, then you shouldn't be afraid. If you need to know what is legal, if you're concerned about licensing something or regulations, I think you'll do a very good job, and I think you'll be able to really sort of understand the small print. Gemini. Mercury. We should be thinking about Mercury. I mean, Mercury is your ruler. So what is Mercury doing right now? And Mercury is in late Sagittarius. It's in the last decan of Sagittarius, and it's getting ready to move into Capricorn. And so this changeover is happening. I think that the change into Capricorn is probably something to be welcomed. I think that with Mercury and Sagittarius, I mean, Mercury on and off has been in Sagittarius for some time. So, it went into Sagittarius. When did it first go into Sagittarius? I think it was in November that Mercury went into Sagittarius, and it went retrograde. So, in fact, Mercury went into Sagittarius on the 29th of October. That is a long time. And, okay, it went back into Scorpio because of retrograde motion. But what started at the end of October is still very much sort of with you, and there are problems with Mercury being in Sagittarius. I mean, Mercury is in its detriment in Sagittarius. It's also in your opposite sign, and so Gemini, you may have felt that there have been times when you weren't in full control, where you are having to take into account other people, not just other people, but just other things going on. And so Mercury moving into Capricorn could be something that you're quite looking forward to, or you should be looking forward to. So you've got the Mercury moving through the last half decan of Sagittarius. So in some respects, Gemini, as you contemplate 2026, it could be a time for sort of wrapping things up and getting ready to move into a situation which in some respects is going to be more complicated. But just because it's more complicated doesn't mean that's a problem. Complications are not necessarily bad. Complications are an opportunity. They allow you to sort of get to grips with something new and just be able to move on. Now, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon is going to be making a trine to Mercury all day long. So I think that you're going to find that it's going to be quite a sociable time for yourself. I mean, you can talk, you can be with people, you can express your views. So that's a good thing if you are in Australia or New Zealand. If you're not in Australia or New Zealand, well, the moon is changing sign. The moon is moving into Taurus. And so with the moon moving into Taurus, you might find that things are slowing down to some extent. I mean, at least externally. You might feel that you don't necessarily want to be seen and heard, all day long. Maybe there are just things you want to keep to yourself, and perhaps you're somewhat irritated by the season. Christmas is over. We should be moving on to 2026, but now you have to worry about the New Year's Eve, and perhaps you're looking at that with a certain amount of discontent. Although the moon will move into Gemini in a few days' time, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. Additionally, I just talked about the fact that Mercury is Mercury has been in Sagittarius and is still in Sagittarius, and I think that you just might feel that your freedom is still somehow undermined. You can't do all the stuff you want to do, but the fact that you're thinking about freedom is important. I think Geminis are. I think Geminis want to break free from something, and there may be something, Gemini, that is bothering you. It's been bothering you for some time, and it's almost been like a millstone around your neck, and you just keep thinking about it. It won't go away, and you can't entirely be yourself. And the good news is that you're starting to understand the problem, and you're starting to understand the solution. So in your own private way, you should be looking for solutions. And it just may be that something that has just been a real pain for a long time is slowly changing. And there could be a growing awareness over the course of the day that something that you thought was a major issue is really nothing. It was maybe a figment of your imagination, or it could be that circumstances are changing, and circumstances are changing your way, and something that you thought was going to hold you back is really nothing worth bothering with. Cancer. It's kind of difficult to define today, because so much of it depends on where you are. So if you're a Cancer in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon is going to be in Sagittarius, and the moon is going to be in Aries all day. If you're in the Americas, the moon is going to be in Taurus, all day, pretty much. So there is a difference, and that does mean that if you are in Australasia, there could be things that you're working on. You might be more focused on what needs to be done. I mean, I know it's just after Christmas, but it's a Monday and it's a new week, and there are things that you might want to engage with, perhaps things of a career nature, or they may just be to do with your ambitions. Just something is just not quite finished. Whereas if you're in the Americas, and to an extent Europe, then it is slightly different. I think that you can be more relaxed, especially from lunchtime onwards. There are more opportunities for being with people, not feeling that you absolutely have to do anything. And the moon in Taurus, because the moon is moving into Taurus, and don't forget, the moon moving into Taurus, that is great. The moon is exalted in Taurus, and furthermore, the moon works best in the first few degrees of Taurus, because 3 degrees Taurus is the position of the moon where it is exalted. So we've got the moon exalted in Taurus making a trine to Venus, and that makes you very effective, certainly on a social level. So if you want to reach out to other people, if you want to be with other people, if you just want to socialize, then I think that it really can be a great Monday, and it's likely that everyone's going to be on your wavelength. So it would be a pity, perhaps, if you were to spend all day alone, because there may be opportunities out there. But if you do choose to spend the day alone, if you're in the Americas, then there could be a feeling of change, and the moon is making a square to Pluto, and so moon square Pluto may be about you thinking about your priorities, because you don't need other people to think about priorities, and especially your long-term priorities, and you're thinking perhaps about 2026 and what you want to achieve in 2026. And when I say achieve in 2026, I'm not talking about things on a material level. I'm talking about more the kind of life you want to live, how you want to sort of align yourself to a new way of being, and a being that it just is essentially in accord, with your own destiny. And maybe with that moon square Pluto, you may recognize that something needs to change, and maybe that something needs to be got rid of. And so Cancer, if you decide that something has just fulfilled its useful purpose, is now holding you back, then moon square Pluto may encourage you to think about how you rid yourself of it. But you don't have to make any decisions now. I don't think that is at all necessary. But Cancer, from a relationship point of view, I'm sorry to harp on about relationships, particularly if you are alone. But the moon is starting to make, it makes a trine to Venus. It also is starting to make trines to Sun and Mars. These aspects really do indicate that the social dimension does matter, that you have the capacity to get on with people, and there is also a sort of a groundedness to it. It's not necessarily about excitement, having a great time in other people's company. It's more about recognizing the permanence of certain people. Okay, I just said that some things might have fulfilled their useful purpose. That's one way of looking at it, moon square Pluto. But another way of looking at it, moon trine Venus, is about recognizing that certain people are not going away, and they are perhaps part of the furniture, but perhaps also part of your security system. And you should be, looking for people who are reliable, because I think some people can be trusted, and that might be something that you're thinking about, over the course of the day. Leo. It's a day, Leo, when your social skills should be pretty good. I think that you can get on with pretty much anyone if you want to, and you're going to be quite charming. I've been saying that for some days, and the reality is that the Sun, your ruler, is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So with the Sun on the Venus-Mars midpoint, it's still on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So that means that if you make the effort, and I don't think you have to make very much effort, people are going to like you, and you can be at the center of things, and relationships overall should go, pretty well. And it's also the case that, the Sun is starting to make a conjunction to Cupido. So Cupido is this hypothetical planet, which Alfred Witte came up with during the First World War. He did some reverse engineering. He was trying to predict Russian artillery barrages, and he thought there must be this hidden planet which would explain these artillery barrages. So he used reverse engineering to come up with an orbit of this planet, which he called Cupido. And Cupido is associated with unions and getting close to people, and it's also associated with marriage, and it's a sociable planet, even though you could also link it with artillery barrages. So there is a dark side to Cupido, but the Sun is moving towards Cupido. The Sun is on the Venus-Cupido midpoint. So the Sun is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. It's also on the Venus-Cupido midpoint. But today is not just about other people. It's also about your ambitions, with the moon moving into Taurus and the moon making a square aspect to Pluto. So with moon square Pluto, you are thinking about what can be done, what needs to be done, and you may be aware of some of the things holding you back. What is holding you back? It could be just the fact that it is the end of December and nothing much is going on, and that could be, certainly for some Leos, something you resent, because fundamentally, right now, you want to get on with it. There are things you want to proceed with. The sooner the better. And if you just are doing nothing, or if you're forced to do nothing, that just might feel rather unsatisfactory. Though I think it's important, Leo, that you don't blame anyone. You don't sort of assume that that there are other people who are getting in your way, that you're not being given a break, that you're not being given a fair hearing, that circumstances aren't right. Don't worry so much about that. That's the dog. The dog's a Leo, of course. So the dog has Sun in Leo, Moon in Scorpio. She takes herself very seriously and certainly doesn't like to be ignored, being an average Leo. So as far as what's happening with your ambitions, moon moving into Taurus does say something about your ambitions, particularly as the moon is making a trine to Venus. And rather than blame anyone or anything if things aren't completely going to plan, you can instead just do what is necessary and do what is possible. I think the possibility aspect of things is important, and moon trine Venus does allow you to get things together in your own way. So you have to think about what do you have control over, and if you focus on that, then you'll be doing your best. To begin with, you might not feel that you're doing anything particularly useful, but things will change. And I think through a sort of a slow, methodical approach, you can, over the next couple of days, really align yourself to the demands of 2026, not just the demands of 2026, but the opportunities of 2026. And of course, by the end of the week, it will be the new year, and you will be able to, have another look at things. And I don't think things will look too bad. I think that, it is a time, Leo, as you move into 2026 with Uranus in Taurus. Remember, Taurus is a sign which is very much focused on your ambitions, and with Uranus in Taurus, you'll have chances during certainly the first quarter of 2026 to do something different and do something really which aligns with your fundamental self. Virgo. There's a lot of Earth around now because the moon is moving into Taurus, and we already have quite a lot of Earth because we've got 3 planets in Capricorn, Venus, Sun and Mars, but now we've got the moon moving into Taurus. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon might not move into Taurus until tomorrow, but I think you can wait until tomorrow. I think it's not such a big deal. So things are happening, and the moon is making a trine to Venus, and because the moon is trining Venus, that is an earthy trine. Taurus trines Capricorn, and so what is the third earth sign? Well, the third earth sign is of course Virgo, which is your sign, and so it might be the case, Virgo, that you just feel that over the course of the day and into tomorrow that things are coming together, that you're starting to understand what is happening, and it's all in accord, with your basic stance. You don't want to be confused, you don't want to be distracted, you don't want to have to worry about things that are irrelevant. And Virgo, the planets do seem to be aligning. So if there is, if there are things you want to do and you don't want to get distracted, then I think you have a chance. But it's not just about being boring, just doing things in the same old way. You have a chance to be able to look at your ambitions perhaps in a new way, and to incorporate new material, new activities, and you don't have to be tied to the past. So I think that you can be quite positive about the way things are moving. And the moon is not just trine Venus; it's also trine Mercury. Now that trine to Mercury is going to be especially powerful if you're in Australia or New Zealand, because you've got moon in Aries, trine Mercury in Sagittarius. But that allows you to see new possibilities, things that you perhaps hadn't been aware of. So, overall, Virgo, I do think that things are moving quite well. And additionally, Virgo, there might be a particular issue that has been bothering you for some time. It just doesn't seem to go away, and it might feel rather difficult, and there might be a degree of worry surrounding it. But a solution does seem to be at hand. Something that might have been just going on for ages. I don't know, maybe since the end of October. I don't know, because end of October was when Mercury moved into Sagittarius. Mercury is still in Sagittarius, but now you may be able to look at things in a new way, and what you thought was a problem, maybe a really serious problem. You look at it again and you're thinking, well, is it actually so bad? And there is a possibility that then there is just this moment where things just come together, when you see that what used to be a pressing problem is actually nothing at all, is just not worth worrying about. So it might either be a case of something just going away, or you just changing your approach. You look at things in a new way, and what seemed to be a real issue is nothing. And so because of that, Virgo, there may be moments you're just feeling a great sense of relief, that it's just not so bad. And it might even feel that there's some sort of outside agency that has come along and just removed a big weight from your shoulders. So I think that you should really try to be positive in that light, and really see how things can be improved, and don't deliberately hang on to problems. Sometimes we like to regard, I'm not a Virgo, but all of us can just hang on to something because it's easier at some level, but some things you can let go of, because they're not it's not just because they're not worth worrying about anymore. It's because there is nothing to worry about. And so that is something that you should really be seeking out. And once you remove an issue, once you remove a problem, or you finally realize that something is just very minor, then you have just a great sense of freedom. And that's perhaps what you should be thinking about, being able to break free from something that has, in the past or in a very recent past, has been holding you back. And now you can kind of float free and explore the world without worrying, and just enjoying the variety. So overall, Virgo, I think it's looking like a pretty good day when you can sort of move on from something and relegate it to the past. It needn't be a worry anymore. Libra. Moon is making a trine to Venus. So the moon moves into Taurus at some stage today. Okay, it might not be until tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand, and then moves into Taurus, and then it makes a trine to Venus. And of course, Venus is your ruler. Now this trine between Moon and Venus is quite low profile. It's not about you being at the center of things. It's not about you feeling that you absolutely have to assert yourself. No, I think you're going to be happiest, where you are. There's no reason to go anywhere. to feel that you have to be pressurized, that you need to be sociable, that you need to circulate. No, you don't. And I think, Libra, if you can, stay in one place, I think that is, probably for the best. I mean, there's perhaps, work to be done, where you are. And if you seek variety, if you listen too much to other people, well, it could just all seem to be, rather, unsatisfactory. And also, if you are in one place, that means that you can start to understand certain complications. Not everything is easy, not everything is simple. And if something is complicated, you probably have to work it out on your own. And that means having concentration. And if you're distracted all the time, you've always got sort of people to worry about. You've got their ideas to worry about. There's one suggestion, there's another suggestion, and you can't really think for yourself. But if you can really center yourself and just be yourself, then that's the best way of approaching the day. And it's not like you're completely isolated. You understand the constraints that are placed upon you. And these constraints can be very, very practical. They may be about, what can be done, perhaps on a legal level. There are always regulations to worry about. I mean, that's perhaps the nature of being alive and being alive in society. Regulations do need to be thought about, and those that can handle the regulations, those that can handle the small pieces of legal detail, are often the ones who succeed. And we shouldn't forget that you are a Libra, and the symbol for a Libra is the scales of justice, and that can relate to the law. So if there's anything of a legal or administrative sense, which perhaps involves government, whether it's central government or local government, then don't shy away from it, because you might learn something sort of quite interesting. So not just interesting, but useful. So don't be afraid of legal small print. It's something you can understand. Furthermore, it's something you can transmit. And perhaps, Libra, you have a good understanding of the law, or perhaps a better understanding of the law than other people. And if, for example, someone is contemplating an action or is doing something which may be may conflict with the law, I think you'll be very good at explaining the reality of the situation. Even if you don't know the law, you can find out about the law very, very easily. And the whole issue of government and thinking about the government, Libra, could be a feature of today. Oh, and also, Libra, you're getting the idea here that it's not a trivial day. Everything needs to be taken seriously. Maybe some people are trivializing things, but you are not. And it's your ability to really understand things and to also realize that you have to get into things deeply. You can't just take a surface view. And that's another good reason why you need to stay where you are. Because it's not a day for scattering your energy, or for being frivolous, for being trivial. Because there are serious things going on today which need therefore to be taken seriously, and that's something that you can do. Scorpio. Right now, Scorpio, the moon is moving into Taurus, and Taurus is your opposite sign. So, with the moon moving into Taurus, it could be that you have to pay some attention to what other people are doing. You're not the only person on the planet. I mean, you know that. And so with moon in Taurus, you can see the influence that some people have, and that might not be entirely welcome. I mean, the moon when it moves into Taurus, it does make a square to Pluto. So when you're dealing with a moon square Pluto, it just can be about you being maybe quite defensive. You're holding on to what you have, to what you control, and you don't want to give it away. And so there is a bit of a challenge there. And so you perhaps have to decide how you're going to handle it. You may take the view that other people should perhaps be avoided, because you know how much influence they can have, and you just need to stick to what you have and not budge. But I think that approach is probably not very helpful. Everyone's got something to offer, and you should give everyone a fair chance. That doesn't mean to say you have to always do what you're told, you have to follow anyone's advice, that you have to let go of anything. That's not true. So do see what people can offer. And also, the moon is making a trine to Venus, and this moon trine Venus is overall a pretty fortunate aspect, and moon trine Venus will allow you to potentially benefit from other people. So you do consider how other people can play a constructive role in your life, and certainly give everyone a chance. Don't just assume that everyone is a problem. Some people really have got something important to offer, but it's just important that you're able to listen to them and understand their perspective. And then you can respond however you feel fit. And if you want to respond in a powerful way, you certainly can. This is a time, Scorpio, when your words do carry a great deal of power, and you may well have the element of surprise. You can be most powerful when you do something or say something that is just completely unexpected, but just comes out of the blue. And so you can think about things, you can analyze things, and then you can make a remark, a very simple remark, maybe a couple of words, but those couple of words could carry a huge amount of weight. Perhaps it's a Scorpio sting that people weren't expecting it, but it suddenly happens. And I think that sting is likely to be verbal rather than in terms of your sort of physical actions. Sagittarius. Well, Sagittarius, you are maybe taking yourself quite seriously right now. You feel that there are things that need to be done, and there's no time like the present. So there could be a degree of impatience, but the question is, do you have the energy to see it through? So just because you want fast results, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get fast results, and things might actually be slower than expected. So if you find yourself being impatient, wanting results now this minute, then maybe you should expand your time horizons. Maybe you won't get it today. Maybe you won't even get it tomorrow. Maybe you'll have to wait till next week, next year. Well, next year is only a few days away. So don't be in too much of a hurry, and don't interpret slowness as powerlessness, because just because something is taking a long time doesn't mean to say that you don't have any power. In fact, Sagittarius, right now you have a considerable amount of power, and you have the ability to really make things happen, and you can really push things forward, but slowly. You're not looking for instant results. Instead, you have to perhaps take a step-by-step approach. What do you have to do? You start with an idea, a plan, and then you persist with it, and you do it slowly, but you don't ever go back. That's the key point. If you keep going forward slowly, you will in the end get to your destination. And I don't really see how anything can hold you up. You're able at the moment Sagittarius, to get round pretty much any obstacle, however difficult it might be, you can get past it, but you just have to take your time, and that is the way through. And in the process, you have to understand other people's perspective, perhaps. People have their own needs, and some people are looking for a break. They feel a little bit claustrophobic, and so if there are people around you, do monitor what they're thinking and what they're feeling, because it's not just you that is looking for freedom, it's other people who are looking for freedom as well. So give people a chance to express themselves, particularly if these people are close to you. You might not immediately understand what they're thinking and feeling, but you should just assume that everyone needs space. I mean, you need space, everyone needs space. And if you can provide an environment where that space is available, then I think that increases the chances of finding real harmony. Now, another thing about today, we do have the moon moving into Taurus, and it makes a trine to Venus. So moon trine Venus, it's not necessarily a spectacular aspect, but it's an aspect that could be quite physical. I mean, moon in Taurus, that's a very physical place of a moon to be. Trine Venus in Capricorn, and this could say something about your body and how you look after your body. Sometimes Sagittarians can, move too quickly, and they've got so many other things to think about that their own health and well-being can be neglected. But that needn't happen with the moon moving into Taurus. And so in terms of your ambitions and what you're trying to achieve, it is about health, well-being, it's about fitness, being on as good a physical form as is possible. And I think that with moon trine Venus, you do have a chance to sort of realign. So going back to what I was saying about you being impatient and wanting results, but you've got to think about your body and what you can put up with. For example, making sure you've got enough sleep, making sure you're eating the right things, making sure you're getting enough exercise but not too much exercise, and getting the balance right. I think that should be a feature, not just of today but of sort of tomorrow as well. Capricorn, the Earth in the sky is making itself felt. You've already got your 3 planets in Capricorn. You're about to get 4 planets in Capricorn, because Mercury is going to change sign very soon, in a few days' time. I think it's January the 1st that Mercury changes sign. So we've got that, and now we've got the moon moving into Taurus. And so moon moving into Taurus is, from your perspective, is great. I mean, moon is in an earth sign. It's making a trine to Venus. So that moon in Taurus trine Venus in Capricorn, I think for you is really quite uplifting. It kind of reminds you of what you can do, of what actually is possible. The fact that you're capable, in fact, of being really very very creative, in a very down to earth way. Today's energies are not about having a dramatic impact, things getting upset, being a star. That's not what today is about. It's about just getting down to the things you enjoy in a quiet way, but also making pretty good progress at the same as well. So you're feeling good about yourself, and there's no reason why you can't get some pretty good results. And with moon trine Venus, inevitably one starts to think about other people and relationships and how you get on with people. And that moon trine Venus is low pressure. It's about you and someone else being able to relate, but you're not restricting anyone's freedom. So, do make the most of the people around you, and see how well you can get on with them, and if you can engage in sort of shared activities, things that you both enjoy, then I think that would be really good. And I think it's something you can do. And I know that as a Capricorn, you often have your doubts. You can be quite suspicious, but maybe you don't have to be suspicious. If you and another person enjoy the same things, well, it doesn't say anything about the future, but it doesn't mean you're taking any risks. Today is today. Well, tomorrow might be something else. So, enjoy the moment. And if you can enjoy the moment with another person, that would be great. But it's also, with this moon trine Venus, may say something about what you want to do, maybe in terms of career or business, because it's all about your creativity and doing something that you're good at. And I think that at the moment you kind of recognize what you are good at, and if you are good at something, then that's what you should be doing. So if you're working today, it's not about doing anything, it's about doing the thing that you do best. And I think that I'm not saying that you should insist on it, because it is a low pressure day. It's not a day for making sort of dramatic gestures, but perhaps sort of quietly you can maneuver yourself into a position where you are making the very most of your strengths. Aquarius, we have the moon moving into Taurus, and so when the moon is moving into Taurus, that might suggest that your priorities are changing. As you move towards the new year, you're perhaps being somewhat thoughtful. You're thinking about the past, and you're not quite ready to handle the future, to handle the challenges of 2026. So there might be a sense in which today is somewhat backward looking. The future will look after itself, but let's deal with the past first. Let's certainly don't go beyond the present. And so moon moving into Taurus might just be about you slowing down, and the moon is making a trine to Venus, and this moon trine Venus, it's a pleasant aspect, but it's not a dramatic aspect, and it needs to be treated carefully. So if you try to take on too much today, particularly if you're trying to do things which are in a sort of a very sort of public setting, I don't think you're going to feel very satisfied. And I think instead, Aquarius, you should be focusing on what you have, not on what you want to have, and don't push it, because I don't think you want to push it. And so if you take that approach, then that is for the best. Because if you were to be in a situation where there was a lot of pressure, where there was a lot of people to deal with, I think you might find yourself almost sort of automatically sort of digging into who you are, starting to really value your own individuality, perhaps at the expense of other people. You're not really in the mood for compromising. You're not in the mood for making an effort, at least on another person's behalf. Everything should be done on your terms. And in a way, that is sort of typically Aquarian. Now, that doesn't mean to say you can't be pleasant, but it's always got to be on your terms. If you go somewhere else where you're not in control, it's just not going to work. And you might find that there is a degree of conflict, and conflict is the last thing you need today. And so what would be the best thing to be doing today? Well, the best thing to be doing today is probably to spend your time in somewhere that you're very comfortable in, like your own home. And I'm talking particularly about the situation if you're in the Americas. I think if you're not in the Americas, if you're in Europe or Africa, or further afield. When I say further afield, Asia, Australia, but certainly if you're in Europe or Africa, the day might be kind of split in two. I mean, I think the first part of the day you can perhaps be more free and open, but lunchtime onwards, really start to sort of retreat. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it's a slightly different picture. The moon is going to be in Aries all day, so perhaps you can be more of an extrovert. So there is a sense in which it does kind of depend on your time zone. Pisces, it's looking like a pretty good day, I think. We've got the moon moving into Taurus. So, with the moon moving into Taurus, it's that is a great place for the moon. It's not just because the moon is exalted in Taurus. It's also because Taurus is the third sign from Pisces. Pisces is sign 1, Aries is sign 2, Taurus is sign 3, and of course the moon joys in the third house, and the moon, from your perspective, Pisces, is in the third house, and that means that you can be yourself. You feel comfortable, and you're able to just deal with the small changes that take place over the course of a day. What are those small changes? Perhaps, you move from one place to another place, and you can handle those changes. It's not a time, though, for sort of going huge distances, feeling you have to go to the other side of the country or even the other side of the state or the county. If you're in the Americas, you don't. You can just be comfortable in your immediate environment, and maybe you're just in that way sort of following the spirit of Christmas, of the holiday season. You don't have to go out of your way, and if you're not out of your way, if you're not going out of your way, you just feel good about yourself, and at the same time, other people feel good about you. Though I'm not suggesting that you are entirely lazy or complacent. That is not true. Pisces, you are thinking about what is possible, and there are certain things that you can't help focusing on. You might be outwardly pretty relaxed, but what's going on, deep down, and I think that deep down, that some things just are necessary, and you keep thinking about them, and there may be an element of obsession here. And when I say obsession, there's nothing wrong with being obsessed. Sometimes we have to be obsessed. If something is important to you and it's valid and it's healthy, then keep being obsessed, and you have the opportunity in a very subtle way over the next day, maybe 2 days as well, to just create small incremental changes. And these small incremental changes can, in the end, work very much, in your favor. And perhaps perhaps you are being a Pisces. I mean, Pisceans can be, quite manipulative, and they can slowly move things their way, and you get people's attention, and you can be persuasive, but you're not being persuasive in an obnoxious or aggressive way. It's all a slow process, and so if you need to get other people onto your side, if you need other people's support, indeed if you need people to do things your way, then you can arrange it. It is a slow process, but it's a real process, and so that might be something that you can be focusing on today and tomorrow. But of course, you've got to think about the ethics of the situation. Are you doing the right thing? Are you only thinking about yourself, or are you thinking about the broader collective good? I mean, there's nothing wrong with thinking about the broader collective good. I mean, you might say that that's quite subjective. Who knows what's in the interests of the collective? Well, maybe Pisces right now, you do understand what's in everyone's best interests, and that can sort of guide your behavior and perhaps also your manipulations. And now I want to switch to the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 21, which is biting through. So biting through, is potentially quite a difficult hexagram. Biting through can be about punishment. If we're dealing with people who are not behaving correctly, well, we have to do something about it. And the image of biting through, there is a sense of rehabilitation here. I mean, it's talking about a piece of gold which is surrounded by leather, and we have to get through the hard leather, and that's where the biting through is, and we have to get through to people. So it may be a situation, particularly if there are people around us where people have got it wrong, and they are maybe behaving inappropriately, maybe they're making mistakes, and you have to get through to them. And it's not necessarily going to be easy, but it's certainly possible. Now, this hexagram, biting through, it has no moving lines. So with no moving lines, that might indicate a lack of action. So we can be aware of other people's mistakes. We can be aware that we need to do something about it. But the question is, what can we do about it? And with no moving lines, it just might be difficult to really make an impact. It just could be slow. And, if we want to get a better understanding of this hexagram biting through, we can look at the nuclear hexagram, the hexagram underneath this, or underlying it. And the underlying nuclear hexagram is hexagram number 39, which is obstruction. So this might indicate that it's a day where nothing really is going on. We know that perhaps people are not getting it right. We may even know that we ourselves are not getting things right. I talked about the previous hexagram in terms of punishment, but it might not just be about punishment in terms of someone else erring from a path. It may be ourselves erring from a path. We perhaps are aware of our own mistakes and we want to kind of lecture ourselves, but are we able to really make any progress? And with the underlying hexagram of obstruction, it's just difficult to get anything done, and that's a problem. So short term, we may have to put up with other people's mistakes. We can try our hardest to correct the situation, but it may not always work. People might not listen, or we just might not have an opportunity to really make our views known. And perhaps short term, that's just a situation we have to put up with. I mean, I'd love to be more positive. I mean, from an astrological point of view, there were some good things going on. Moon trine Mercury, Moon trine Venus, but maybe with Moon moving into Taurus, when you think about Moon moving into Taurus, you think that's quite a stubborn sign. It's quite an unchanging sign, and that's maybe what we're seeing with the I Ching. We're aware of how stuck things can be. We're also aware that people are making mistakes, but the question is, what can we do about it in the short term? And maybe in the short term, there isn't actually much we can do. And so I want to finish by looking at the horoscope of King Charles, the King of Britain, King of the United Kingdom, whatever. And, I do look at his chart, every now and then. I think it is an important chart if you are British, because, he is the head of state, and you could argue where the king goes, the country goes. So, for example, in in the UK, there is, as far as I understand, a great deal of dissatisfaction. Things are not going well, and so that does link with the king. If the king is sick, then the land is sick. Because we don't know how sick he is. We don't know whether he's sick at all. I mean, he had prostate cancer, but has the cancer improved? Maybe it's gone away. I've no idea. I mean, I think the last time I saw, he was saying he's got over it. I mean, but I assume that is the case. But he's not just an individual. He is a figurehead, and he does represent the country. So that is a good reason why we should be looking at his horoscope. So recently, for example, here's King Charles's horoscope. You'll notice, by the way, that he has got his moon at 0 degrees Taurus. So he's got a lunar return at the moment, and I think I'll look at that lunar return. And he made a speech on Christmas Day, which was quite a controversial speech. I mean, I didn't watch it, but from what I can hear, he was sort of emphasizing the diversity in Britain, and perhaps sort of moving away from his role as being head of the Church of England. There are some people on the right who are saying, well, we are Britain is a Christian country, and you shouldn't emphasize diversity too much. And as far as the speech is concerned, I don't think there's anything especially spectacular in his speech. But here is a chart for his speech, his Christmas, because there's a tradition where on Christmas Day the monarch makes a speech. I think around sort of 3 p.m, just after lunch, and this is a tradition. This is a chart. This is a horoscope for 3 o'clock, and of course on Christmas Day there were a lot of planets in Pisces, and if you've been watching my videos, you will know that I do associate the sign Pisces with diversity. And we've now got Saturn and Neptune are back in Pisces. We've got the moon in Pisces. We've got the North Node in Pisces. Pisces is not about just sticking to one thing. You've got to look at the whole sort of diverse society. And so it's kind of not surprising that when he made this speech, we've got sort of towards the top of the chart, we've got the moon, North Node, Saturn and Neptune. I mean, what other speech would he make? I mean, that might seem, given the astrological circumstances, the right speech to make, but we should not forget that Saturn and Neptune are sort of only sort of temporarily in Pisces. Very soon Saturn and Neptune will be in Aries, and I think that's going to create a bit of a difference. I mean, with Neptune in Pisces, I associated Neptune in moving into Aries with less focus on diversity and so on, the wokeness and so. But with Saturn and Neptune moving back, it's kind of perhaps a last hurrah for all those who were feeling that diversity and listening to everyone is the be all and end all of everything, that tolerance and compassion are the be all and end all of everything. Well, that's where we are at the moment, but it's only a temporary situation. And King Charles's speech perhaps reflected this temporary situation. Now, one planet that is important here is Neptune. Neptune has now gone direct. Neptune is at 29 and a bit Pisces. So this does link to Charles's chart, and what I really wanted to perhaps focus on, one of the things I wanted to focus on, is the fact that Charles has a Jupiter-Uranus opposition. That Jupiter-Uranus opposition perhaps very much defines Charles. It's because it's so close, and with that Jupiter-Uranus opposition, it's always something that he is looking for. He's with Jupiter Uranus, one is thinking about freedom and the struggle for freedom and the struggle for him to do whatever he wants, and that Jupiter is in Sagittarius. And Jupiter in Sagittarius can be quite doctrinaire. Jupiter has ideas about the way things should be done, and that is always a criticism of Charles, that he is always even when he was before he became king, he would always write to ministers and asking for things, and he got his views on the climate, on architecture, all sorts of other things, and so he may well be an ideological king. And now that he's king, he's got Jupiter in Sagittarius, opposition Uranus. So he's perhaps feeling that he can express a view, and maybe his views are sort of in accord with the Labour government, because the Labour government in Britain is quite sort of concerned about diversity, and I think to an extent is maybe out of sync, or about to be out of sync with what else is going on, remembering that Neptune is about to move into Aries. So that's Charles's chart. But what is Neptune doing? Neptune is making a square to that Jupiter-Uranus opposition. So he's got Neptune square his Jupiter, he's got Neptune square his Uranus. Saturn is moving through late Pisces, and on February the 14th, Saturn will go into Aries. So he's soon going to have Saturn on his Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, and that may be a sense of realization about what he can do, what he can't do. And of course, the moment Saturn is square his Jupiter, square his Uranus, well, it moves into Aries. Neptune will also be in Aries, and so I think that might be a time when Charles really is out of sync with what is going on in the collective, because the collective is in the process of a huge change. And we shouldn't think, with all this Pisces stuff, wokeness, diversity, all these things that Charles, seems to represent. And this is perhaps also reflected by the fact that there's going to be a new Archbishop of Canterbury. I was considering talking about her chart, because having a woman as an Archbishop of Canterbury, and that seems to relate to all this Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a woman being Archbishop of Canterbury. On the other hand, she has the new Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, I don't want to talk about her at the moment. Perhaps I'll talk about her, when she becomes enthroned. But I think she's very much connected with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. But it's because it's not because she's a woman. It's because of perhaps what she represents and the way her career has progressed. But anyway, I'll talk about that later. So this Saturn-Uranus opposition is especially Jupiter-Uranus opposition is especially relevant when we look at primary directions. So when you talk about primary directions, primary directions were the main form of making predictions before in Western astrology before the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century. And so the way primary directions work is that every single degree after you are born represents 1 year of life. And so you look really at how the positions of the heavens relative to the horizon change in, say, the first 6 hours of your life. Because in the 6 hours of life, that's, if you take 1 degree for every year, so that means after 6 hours, approximately 6 hours, you'll be 90 years old. So by 8 hours, well, 8 hours, so no one's going to live beyond 8 hours. So that certainly that first 8 hours is going to cover human life. So those first 8 hours after you were born are really important in terms of mapping out your entire life. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm I'm completely sold. I'm completely sold on the idea of primary directions. They don't always work, but Charles is coming up to a major primary direction. He's coming up for several important primary directions at the moment. And the most obvious one is represented by his Jupiter-Uranus. So what we're going to do is, so Charles is now, he has just turned 77. So what we do is we move the Earth 77 degrees. So we move the Earth on its axis 77 degrees, and we see what things look like. So if we do that, this takes us, so remember Charles was born on November the 14th. He was born on November the 14th, 1948 at 9:14 p.m. So if we move the Earth 77 degrees, then we get to this chart. So this takes us through to November the 15th, the next day at, what's that? I think that's 2:22 a.m. So that is the moment where Uranus hits his midheaven. So Uranus was rising, was on the 12th house cusp when he was born. Jupiter was on the 6th house cusp. So that Jupiter-Uranus opposition is moving up towards the midheaven, and it hits the midheaven 5 hours and 8 minutes after he was born. Now, 5 hours and 8 minutes, that means the Earth had moved 77 degrees in 5 hours and 8 minutes, and he's 77 years old. So now Uranus is right on his midheaven, and Jupiter is right on his IC. And because it's King Charles, we know we have an exact time of birth, because often with primaries, time of birth can be an issue, but we do have an exact time of birth. So I'm expecting something quite major to happen with Charles in 2026. It could be Uranus on the midheaven. You think that is his position as king? Does that mean he's going to abdicate? I shouldn't think he is going to abdicate. I mean, logically, I don't know what's going on. Is it to do with his health? You wouldn't normally associate Uranus on the midheaven with health. Jupiter on the IC, well, Jupiter on the IC can do anything. I mean, Jupiter on the IC, Jupiter is a treacherous planet. Jupiter can indicate death. And I mean, I'm not predicting death. You should never predict the death of kings. That's a complete no-no for astrologers. There's a tradition that astrologers should avoid that. But, if we're talking about King Charles and death, well, we would be thinking about the high leg. So the high leg is the giver of life. High leg, Hyleg. The high leg is the planet that gives life, and the idea is that you isolate that planet, and then you are looking for the direction, a primary direction, which hits the high leg. And as the astrologer John Wasdale, he was an early 19th century astrologer whose speciality was predicting death, he would say, perhaps in a quite a pompous way, he would say you're looking for the terminus vitae. So the terminus vitae is the killing direction. It's the direction that kills you. And that's how he claims that he basically predicted death. You look for the terminus vitae. So as far as Charles's chart is concerned, let's go back to King Charles's chart. So in terms of the high leg, first thing with the high leg is, in a daytime chart, to put it simply, you should give preference to the sun as the high leg. In a nighttime chart, you should give preference to the moon. Now, in Charles's chart, he was born at night, and he has the moon above the horizon. So the high leg should be, the planet which is the high leg should be above the horizon. And the moon is above the horizon. And it shouldn't be in the 12th house. So if it was the 12th house, you couldn't have it. But, the moon is in the 10th. So I think there is no doubt in Charles's chart that the moon is a high leg. So what you would be looking for is a primary direction to the high leg, perhaps of a malefic. But the question is, what kind of aspect do you look for? And so with primary directions, you're not doing it across the degrees. You're doing it almost to the shadow of where the planet was relative to the horizon. So if you look at Charles's moon, it's kind of in the middle of the 10th house. So that, that's where you should see it. And then if we go back to the primaries, I mean, this is not entirely obvious, but Saturn has moved to the Saturn 5 hours and 8 minutes after he was born has moved to the cusp of the 12th, and it is 1.5 signs away from the middle of the 10th house. In other words, it's making a 45-degree aspect to the echo of the moon, and likewise the sun is making an 135-degree aspect to the echo of the moon. And the moon, remember, is the giver of life, the high leg. So in 2026, the sun and Saturn are aspecting his high leg. Now, just because you've got your high leg aspected doesn't mean you're going to drop dead. I mean, it's more complicated than that. You've got to look at a number of other things. But as far as Charles's health and well-being is concerned, there is possibly a cause for concern, because the Sun and Saturn are both aspecting his high leg by semi-square and sesquiquadrate. And so finally, you might want to look at some of his returns. So here's Charles's solar return. And so in his solar return, set for his last birthday, 2025, notice that the moon is making an opposition aspect to Saturn. It says daylight saving time. In fact, that it shouldn't be daylight saving time. But but don't worry, that solar return is right. So I know if it wasn't daylight saving time in November, that it is the correct solar return, even if some of these details are wrong. But so at the time of the solar return, Moon is making an opposition to his Saturn. Now that might be of some concern, because the solar return is kind of reflecting, what else is going on. Do you see something in directions? You see Saturn is aspecting his moon by primary direction. We see that the moon is making an opposition to his Saturn in his solar return as well. So that sort of adds to the concern that one might have, and plus the fact we've got Uranus on his midheaven, Jupiter on his IC from a primary direction perspective. And while we're at it, it's probably a good idea to look at Charles's lunar return. That's the final chart I'm going to look at, which is something I didn't set up. So because lunar return is now. It's all right. So here is Charles's lunar return, and if we look at Charles's lunar return, I'm not saying it's particularly dramatic. I mean, but the moon is in kind of in the first house if you're using whole signs. So that might be something to think about. But I'm not saying it's of huge significance. But then we might want to look at other lunar returns, and having the moon in the 12th, close to the first house, does that echo what we know already? Well, the question might then be the moon. Yeah, you see, here's the problem, and this is the problem, that if you look at Saturn is at 26 degrees Pisces. So Saturn at 26 degrees Pisces is making a semi-square to his moon. and the moon, so this is sort of in his lunar return, and it's one of the transits he's been having. So I don't know how he's been responding to having Saturn semi-square his moon. I mean, it may be that Saturn is past the semi-square of the moon, but it's not quite as strong as it used to be. But perhaps it is. Perhaps it's emphasised here in a lunar return. But as far as lunar returns and how much I use them, I'm afraid lunar returns, in my experience, are not as effective as solar returns. I mean, solar returns can be pretty hit and miss, but lunar returns can be completely hit and miss. Anyway, those are a few thoughts on Charles III. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.